Welcome to the Festival of Storytellers. I thank everybody that's involved with this process because we know writers need readers and writers need publishers.
Experience is not about the publisher, it is about us, the authors.
Well, hello, everyone. First, I want to thank each of you for taking the time to visit with me to learn more about my book and me as the author of American Insanity. And secondly, I want to thank Dennis at Reader's Magnet and Reader's Magnet for all their help and support in promoting my book. For those of you who were unable to attend yesterday's session, during which I discussed the content of my book, let me provide you with a short summary of my book, and then I'll talk a little bit about my background and experiences, which led me to my writing American Insanity. I chose the title American Insanity because I felt that it best describes what I write about in my book, namely, all the insanity and corruption occurring within our federal government and within our society in general. And I wanted a title that describes for the potential reader all the insane, corrupt, unconstitutional atrocities the government is committing against those that it was created to serve. Subjects which I cover in American Insanity include a wide range of that corruption, broken down by departments, agencies, and individuals within the government who are committing these corrupt acts, and I want to expose those people in those departments. I wrote American Insanity to help shed light on the level of corruption that exists within our federal government, the extent to which our federal government is abusing its powers, and the extent to which our federal government is infringing upon our constitutional rights. Information mostly unknown to the general public, because our mainstream news media has become so politicized that they no longer report any news that doesn't fit their ideology, the ideology they support. Having been a part of the Washington bureaucracy, or the swamp if you prefer, for 11 years, I am very familiar on how that swamp works. So it is that swamp and the corruption within that swamp that I address at length in my book. Most importantly, I speak about how and why it is the swamp, not Congress, which really governs the United States. I talk about how and why we have lost the respect of foreign nations and lost our rightful place on the world stage. Then I also include chapters in which I address the level of denigration our Constitution has suffered because of Supreme Court rulings and the outright ignoring of our Constitution by corrupt federal government politicians and employees. I continue with chapters in which I lay out how the government has been steadily overreaching its constitutional authority, how and why power-hungry Washington politicians and elitists are transforming our states from sovereign entities into being nothing more than submissive subjects to the federal government, which very much conflicts with what the Constitution states. I include chapters which lay out the impact that our failed public school system is having on the future of our children and on the future of our constitutional republic. I address the lies our government is feeding us about our southern border security and the real impact this is having on communities across the country. I explain how insane our national debt has become, how we got to this point, and what all this means to the average American household. In other chapters, I lay out the extent to which our government is willing to go in order to silence and disarm American citizens with opposing viewpoints and why they're doing this. I include chapters that address how and why our two-party political system is failing, America's insane shift from capitalism towards socialism, the attempts being made by the Washington elitists to push America towards a globalist nation, and what all this will mean for our individual constitutional rights and our constitutional republic. I discussed the extent to which our federal government has been weaponized against its own citizen and how the government is failing to conduct their actions and decisions within the confines of the Constitution. I continue with chapters in which I attempt to provide a feel for why American voters have become so apathetic towards our government and why so many members of Congress so easily fall into the grips of corruption. In short, what I'm attempting to do is wake people up to the harsh realities that is today's America. The last two chapters I dedicate to addressing the only real solutions available to us in order to save our constitutional republic. For example, within those two chapters, I discuss solutions such as the convening of a convention of states under Article 5 of the Constitution and election integrity, and how we can all play a part in, and actually must play a part in, bringing about election integrity. As for my background, well, I'm the oldest of 11 children and grew up in Fargo, North Dakota. After graduating high school, I joined the Marine Corps, which landed me in Vietnam during 1965 and 1966. Having survived that experience, I returned home and went back to school and got my degree in healthcare administration. I then spent 29 years working for the Department of Veterans Affairs as a healthcare administrator. The last 11 years of that 29-year career, I worked at the VA headquarters in Washington, D.C., first as the Chief of Policies and Operations, then as the Acting Director of Headquarters Health Administration Service. These positions required me to work closely with members of Congress and White House staff regarding veterans' issues and concerns. These positions also required me to write responses to inquiries from Congress and the White House, and to respond to complaints from veterans and veteran organizations. I had to learn to write responses which were to the point and clearly address the issues presented. It was during those 11 years that I began to really learn about the workings of the Washington, D.C. bureaucracy. In fact, I went to Washington very naive about our federal government and the politicians we elected to represent us, believing, like many, that those representing us were actually honorable people who had our best interests at heart. Well, it didn't take long before I started realizing that most of those we elected were sociopaths who were only there to serve their own best interests. I have served two two-year terms as a township councilman, and this is when I learned that local government can be as corrupt as all the other levels of government. Following my retirement from the federal government, I served 11 years as a volunteer firefighter and EMT, after which I entered into a partnership with my son, who is a senior master mechanic operating our own business as an engine and transmission repair shop. And just to be clear, I did not get my hands dirty, but rather stuck to managing the administrative and financial aspects of the business. This was the period in which I really learned just how crushing government regulations and taxations were on a business. It was during my period as a volunteer firefighter that I was elected to the fire department's board of directors and then to the chair of that board. While serving as the chair, I found numerous inappropriate and illegal actions being allowed to occur within the fire department, some of which could have easily gotten someone seriously hurt or killed. I attempted to gain the support of the members of the board to resolve these issues, which could have easily resulted in our being sued, but to no avail. Their excuse for not correcting these problems was they had been functioning this way for years and they had each other's backs. All the members of the department were close friends, neighbors, relatives, and hunting and fishing buddies. In other words, the fire department was a good old boys club, and I was not a member of that club. Because of my persistence and demands to correct these problems, they voted me off the board of directors, which was not a good idea on their part, because it only led me to go on to the county and state authorities to seek resolutions, who actually promised me to look into my concerns. These authorities just never seemed to get around to doing anything about those problems, which actually began my career as a writer, writing op-eds to local news medias and on my Facebook site about what was occurring at the fire department, which astonishingly got results, and the department was finally audited, and several of the members who were responsible for most of the wrongdoing took early retirement knowing that they would be fired. This is when I learned about the power of the pen. These experiences led me to become obsessed with seeking out corruption at all levels of government and then making my findings public through op-ed letters to the editors of numerous newspapers. Alfredo, I couldn't agree with you more. But you would think that there are probably almost 50% of Americans who have got their heads sticking in a hole in the ground or just don't want to believe what is going on. Because I talk to a lot of people who have not heard about a lot of the problems going around or disagree with my findings about the wrong that's going in and around the government. So we've got a lot of people out there that just don't get it. Right now, I'm active with the Convention of States movement, both as a district captain and a content writer. I do this in hopes of being a small part of the effort to rein in our out-of-control government. I spend every day reading and researching political corruption within our government. And then I write political op-ed articles about that government corruption. In fact, it was writing the articles that inspired me to write this book. And just to let everyone know, I am currently working on my next book, which I'm going to title Government Gone Rogue. In that book, I will be addressing how our federal government has been turned from a shield to protect every citizen in this country to a sword to destroy any who would dare voice opposition to the ruling party. As we all know, there's a lot to be learned about the extent of corruption within our federal government, and I cover a lot of that corruption in my book. And I believe you will finish reading this book with a clearer understanding of just how deep that corruption really runs and why and how each one of us can and must become involved if we are to save our republic. I encourage you to please seriously consider buying a copy of American Insanity to learn the real extent to which our government and news media are failing our republic. Finally, I want to ask everyone to please visit my website at americaninsanity.org. That's American Insanity, one word, .org, for the links to purchasing my book. Or if you want to go straight to the links, those links are American Insanity by LeRoy Cossette at Book Baby Bookshop. Hey, Jake. Hi back to you. For Barnes & Noble, go to barnesandnoble.com. And in the search box, enter American Insanity by LeRoy Cossette.
Unknown caller.
For Amazon purchases, go to amazon.com. And again, in the search box, enter American Insanity by LeRoy Cossette. So before I go on about my background, do I have any questions at this point? I'd be more than happy to answer them. But what I would like to do, share a few paragraphs from various chapters in my book to give you a feel for what this book is all about. A few of those excerpts read as follows. Our constitutional form of government is complex, with its multiple branches intended to keep each other in check. There are significant advantages with such a complex form of governance, but such a complex government is more prone to becoming disrupted than our simple forms of democracies and monarchies. If we are to retain these advantages and prevent dangerous disruptions in our constitutional form of governance, we must jealously guard the distinctive characters to this form of governing against the tendency of corrupt and power-hungry men and women willing to destroy and eliminate any trace of that governing system. Another snippet from the book reads as follows. Today, we are in a battle against the evil that exists within our government, which is attempting to create a centralized government with all power placed in the hands of one person. Due to the failure of our federally funded school system, polls indicate that fully 1/3 of American college students actually approve of communism over capitalism. Going on to another chapter on education, on our education system, I write, our young children are becoming no more than ignorant fools who have been taught by woke ideological idiots. Our children should be taught that you can foolishly vote yourself into communism, but you have to shoot your way out of it. Taught that Marxist communist leaders live a life of luxury while their subjects live a life of misery. Gnarly. I even have a chapter talking about the apathetic view that Americans hold against politicians and our government, and why that is, and how we need to go about to fix and get those people back on track and help us to save our constitutional republic, and not just to sit at home and yell at the TV every time some news comes on that they disapprove of, or that reports on more government corruption. Back to some of the information I write about. I write that our children should be taught that once that the Marxist communists have taken control, Marxist communist leaders will not give up their power easily and will fight, even kill, to keep it. Far too many of our college professors are intellectual malcontents who are the products of the 1960s anti-American radical hippie movement, who are now brainwashing our children rather than educating them in the skills and knowledge which will allow them to thrive in a competitive world. From another chapter, I write the following. Over the past few decades, the balance of power within our federal government, as well as between the sovereign states and the federal government, has come under ever-increasing attacks by political leaders and wealthy elitists in Washington, D.C., as well as radical politicians who govern states and cities, all willing to disregard the Constitution and the state's power under that Constitution. Another snippet from my book reads as follows. We, as citizens of this great nation, must be willing to become involved with the political activities of our government to guard against the dangerous encroachment against our constitutional form of government. We must be willing to sacrifice our time and our talents to this end in honor of those who have given their lives or suffered horrendous injuries in time of war to protect our constitutional republic. Each one of us must be willing to stand courageously and persistently to protect our God-given rights in the Constitution of the United States. If our constitutional form of governance is to survive, it must be maintained as written by the founding fathers or as modified by amendments to the Constitution. It must always be a life priority of we the people, those we elected to represent us, those within our judicial system, and those within our executive branch, to stand united to assure the perseverance of our unique form of government for the people, by the people, and of the people. Remember, there's a quote, and I don't recall who it was that said it, but it goes like this, quote, "It is wise men who establish governments, brave men who defend and die for governments, and weak, corrupt, and ambitious men who destroy governments." End of quote. The strength and power of our nation does not rest upon the fact that we are a federation, but that we are a union based upon a constitution devised by the people, adopted by the people, defended by the people, and preserved by the people. And I agree with you, JP. We need to ensure some sanity within our government and within our society, for that matter, because we know how crazy young adults have been getting over incidents that have been occurring, and incidents that I know they don't have a clue about what those incidents are all about. In fact, I've done some research which tells me that many of those young adults who are protesting are there only because they've been paid to be there. And there are some that are there only to have some fun with their friends. So, it's just so crazy. Back to some of of what I write. I go on to say, no objective is so important that we should ever sacrifice the very nature and glory of our system of government. It is critical for the survival of our Constitution that any attempt to destroy it be quickly and sternly rebuffed. Elected as well as unelected government officials who, through motives of cowardly expediency, weakness of moral or mental character, or for other seditious reasons, who have failed to stand courageously together with honor and integrity to protect our God-given rights, must be stopped and eliminated totally. Today, our constitutional republic is being seriously threatened by perverted and corrupt created anarchy. Yeah, that's a good question, JP. In my book, the last 2 chapters, and I'll get to that in a bit, I talk about the ways that people can become involved in turning the path that our country is currently on, get it turned around and back to what was intended by our founding fathers. So there is information in the book that addresses that. All right, back to what I was reading. Anarchy is the means utilized by the wicked, malicious, and envious among our citizenry to gain control over the citizenry. Our nation's peril is currently in the hands of wickedly treacherous elected and unelected officials. officials who so easily fall to misleading demands for change in our established and tried governing system, sometimes made under the pretense of reform, sometimes masquerading as justice. Therefore, the highest and most patriotic goal each of us can consider is to understand the fundamental principles of our constitutional heritage and to defend and protect them with our very lives. Defend them against those who would narrowly restrict our God-given constitutional rights and those who would destructively expand them. Not since the Civil War have we faced such a great force bound and determined to bring down our way of life, to divide and separate we the people in an effort to destroy our constitutional republic and to marshal in a Marxist communist form of government. There is a path forward, but it requires us to look back to the framers who rightly insisted on preserving the prominent governing role of the state legislators as crucial mechanisms to contain the power of the federal government. In fact, other than the limited specified powers granted to the federal government within our Constitution, the states retain for themselves complete governing authority, as articulated in the 10th Amendment. And I quote, "Those powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people." Article 5 of the Constitution expressly grants we the people, through our state legislators, significant authority to rebalance the constitutional structure for the purpose of restoring our founding principles should the federal government shed its limitation, abandon its original purposes, and grow too powerful, as is now the case. It must be understood by the citizens of this great nation that we are at war against the attempted takeover of our constitutional republic. It is no longer acceptable that any citizen of this country does not acknowledge this reality and join in the battle to save our republic. I go on in other chapters to write, the United States federal government has become corrupt at levels which could dwarf third world countries. The systematic corruption of our elected members of Congress and the unelected federal bureaucrats cover a multiple number of means of corruption and are typically used concurrently with similar aims. Thank you, Catherine. I appreciate those kind words. I've made it my life dedication to speak out and keep on speaking out until the day they put me in my coffin. These corrupt methods include, but are not limited to, bribery, embezzlement, theft, fraud, graft, extortion, blackmail, influence peddling, that sounds familiar, networking, abuse of discretion, favoritism, and nepotism. Far too many politicians are involved with one or more of these corrupt actions, using their office of trust as a means to become wealthy while disregarding the expectations of the people and the promises they made to their constituents. This corruption and ineptness spans the full spectrum of our federal government. And I go on, of course, and I explained a lot of what I'm talking about in those paragraphs. So in yet another chapter, I write, the willingness of America's free press to report news with honor and integrity is destroying America from within by creating an uninformed American citizenry. Citizens who are consequently left with misinformation regarding the anti-American actions of a corrupt federal government. A woke movement attacking our police forces, demanding they be defunded and disbanded, leaving the general public to the mercy of criminals. Thank you. Is it Jesha? I'm sorry, I probably didn't got that all wrong, but thank you for those kind words. Our press has also left unaware, our people unaware of our military's denigration due to reduced funding, injection of woke ideology, or of the discharging of experienced warriors for refusing to accept unconstitutional mandates, leaving America vulnerable to our enemies. Monique, you're a very kind person. Thank you so much for those kind words. Our press has left our citizens uninformed about ongoing attacks on our religious freedoms, our children's failed education system, and about attacks against both our small and large businesses by the woke crowd because the targeted business does not accept their ideology. These unethical news outlets are purposefully withholding the full truth regarding January 6th protests from American citizens who have a constitutional right to this information. A free press could have assured that those politically imprisoned protesters, whose only crime was merely being present at the Capitol building, exercising their constitutional right to assemble and protest by holding the federal government accountable for their arrest and imprisonment without their constitutional right to due process and a speedy trial. Our press has left American citizens uninformed and left them with no idea of the consequences these unconstitutional actions, which went unreported, will have on their children and their children's lives in the coming future. Because of a largely biased Marxist communist government influenced press, today's American citizen is not aware of universities teaching our future leaders to think and believe in Marxist communist ideology. They are not aware of Marxist communist wokeism destroying people's livelihood just because those targeted don't believe or see things the way they do. They are not aware of the wokeism infiltrating our entertainment industry, our institutions of learning, our military, and our corporations. Unaware what the mandating of unapproved vaccines can mean to their future health, or the truth about critical race theory. American citizens who depend on Marxist communist news outlets for their news have not been fully informed as to the depth and extent of the chaos, crime, drug abuse, human trafficking, which is running rampant across our country, and the high number of deaths from drug overdose of our young adults. The biased Marxist communist government influenced press are not reporting on the extent of harm and deaths occurring in our country because of an open border policy allowing murderers, rapists, child traffickers, molesters, and drug dealers into our country. are not being told about a sitting president's attempt to buy midterm votes for Marxist Communist Democrat candidates by depleting our strategic oil reserves to slightly bring down the price of fuel. Of President Biden's failed attempt to beg OPEC into not increasing oil production until after the midterm election, or of the extent of irrefutable evidence against the Biden family of bribery and influence peddling. The biased Marxist Communist government influenced press has totally failed to keep the general public informed as they once did. News stories which could easily propel a journalist to the level of fame of Post reporters Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, who uncovered information suggesting that knowledge of the Watergate break-in and attempts to cover it up led deeply into the upper reaches of the Justice Department, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Central Intelligence Agencies, and the White House. All news items which any respected news journalist could be jumping on and could even win a Nobel Prize for reporting what's actually going on within our government. But today's mainstream media reports and news outlets are only interested in reporting Marxist communist propaganda. What the biased Marxist communist government influenced press did assure is that American citizens were well aware of President Biden's promise to forgive college student loan debts, done in an attempt to buy those students' votes for the Marxist Communist Democrat Party. The biased government-influenced press did assure the reporting of the public arrest and humiliation of those opposing the Marxist Democrat Party and the unprecedented raid on the home of a former president who will be an opposing candidate against Biden in 2024, and the endless, unprecedented, and flimsy indictments by Marxist district attorneys and grand juries of a former president of the United States, something that has never happened in the history of our country. In other chapters, I write about the Constitution of the United States and the God-given rights that our Constitution guarantees each and every American citizen, which is being deliberately denigrated and criminally ignored by Democrats and Republicans alike. I talk about how the Constitution, which is the foundation under which the laws of our country are formulated, is continuously being diluted by Supreme Court justices. These justices are constantly legislating from the bench in violation of separation of power as articulated in Articles 1, 2, and 3 of the Constitution. I talk about the millions of illegal immigrants that are pouring into the United States. This invasion force is significantly larger than the armed forces of the majority of the countries in the world. This invasion force is bringing death and destruction, not only to the communities along the border, the Mexican border, but have penetrated into the very heart of our nation. It is well known that our government is providing aid and assistance to these enemies by sheltering and feeding them and providing transportation to all corners of the United States. We are systematically and openly being stripped of our right to self-determination, freedom of speech, religious freedoms, and our right to keep and bear arms without any infringement by the government. The federal government, along with many states, are shamelessly assaulting and eroding away our First and Second Amendment rights. And I see my time is about out, so I want to again ask everyone to please visit my website. That's AmericanInsanity.org. That's where you can find links to purchasing my book. And I hope that you will seriously give consideration to buying my book to learn more about how deeply we as a country are corrupt. If you can, please join me tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern Time when I'll be presenting more about my book. So with that, if there are no questions, I'll thank you for joining me and wish you a good day.